Hey guys, it is May 6th. We've got ourselves a balance patch, a pretty decent one that includes two reworks. And I do want to mention a quick definition for when people use the terms light rework, heavy rework, and redesign. A redesign is when they take a hero and they completely change the design of them. Usually it changes the role, similar to Tassadar's. It was called a rework by Blizzard, but it's more called a redesign by the community. And then there's light reworks that are like the old Sonya one, where it just changed a couple things, but it was called a rework, but it was just really, really light. Then we have reworks like Asmodan's, where he shifted, his playstyle shifted a little bit. And the same idea with some of these other reworks. So we do have two pretty heavy reworks. I wouldn't call them redesigns. I would say the Tracer one is close to a redesign just because it's going to change her playstyle a decent amount. But with all that being said, let's get into it because all you guys care about is the details. So, as always with balance patches, I'm going to read through it and then I'm going to explain how it's going to affect the meta. If the rework is big enough, then I'm going to make a separate video for it, and that's going to come out within the next couple days, and you guys can see all of that, as well as I'll bring up all the different builds and stuff with it. So, let's get into it. Next is Anomaly. This was a very contentious topic. It did feel bad. I mean, I'll just come out and say it. It was one of those changes where I'm like, I'm not the game developer, so I can't choose whether or not something gets into the game or not. My goal is to adapt to the new changes. Well, this one did feel bad. When you're pushing with something, you start taking damage, and it's like, that feels bad because defense is always going to be able to do something. Now, the average game change was only less than a minute, is what they said when they actually used their tools to see how much it adjusted, and they said it only increased the games by less than a minute. And it's like, I get that, but it did feel bad, and it required teams to just split push, which also felt bad. High siege damage teams got a lot more common. So overall, I like these changes that they're adjusting with it. I think they're really solid. Should help with that feeling a little bit. It's towers, forts, and keeps aren't going to be doing as much damage, which means that your tank can tank these for a little bit longer. Structures will only focus their attacks on things that are near them when they get hit. So if you deal damage, let me again bring out my crayons for a second. And with my crayons, let's say that over on this side we've got a turret, we've got a turret, and we've got a wall. Now, if your tank and your team decides to go in, like what you normally should do with strategy if you're pushing in with an objective, is you want to go in and you want to destroy this sidewall down here, and you want to push in like this and see if you can cut them off while they're trying to deal with the objective. Well, if you guys are good with this now, you guys can destroy this turret, and then even if you attack something and you're only enraged for one, and you're doing damage over times, like, you're not going to immediately pull the aggro of everything. But the secondary thing that this does is if you're playing like Gazlo and you're trying to siege in and you're right here, and you have like a turret that's way over here, that's hitting some random enemy that's just like trying to mind his own business, then suddenly all the turrets will attack you, even though you're not actually attacking anyone on that siege. So they are fixing that as well. So it does a lot of random things that are kind of nice, and it's just going to make it a little bit more reasonable if everyone's focusing one turret at a time, because you're only going to grab aggro from things that are in their range, because the allied hero has to be in that range. So if you're near a turret, an enemy turret, and you damage a hero that's outside the range, then you're good. So again, if you guys you have your entire group pushing, and there's heroes over here, you destroy this turret, you could even be sitting right here, right next to a turret, and just blowing up this guy, and you're perfectly fine. So it's a pretty reasonable change, I would say. With that being said, let's move on. They've also fixed the Chen issue and the periodic issue, which is also great, so damage over times won't do it. Overall, what this is going to do to the meta, it's going to bring the meta slightly back to where it was. Defense is still going to have a little bit of an advantage. But at the same time, this is going to give offensive teams a lot more strategy to play around this. And it's also going to give tank players much more playmaking potential when they take 10% less damage. That pretty much allows them to take, usually it takes about 10 tower shots to kill you. Now it's going to take 11. And that 11th shot is going to maybe give you enough time for your healer to throw a couple extra heals as well, which then keeps you alive for a few more, and because you're alive for a few more, then maybe your cooldowns are back again, and then suddenly you took 20 shots, which means that you can take an extra 2. So it's going to really add up, and this is going to allow offense to have a lot more plays. Good tank players are going to see this patch as a huge buff. Anyways, collection. Awakened Dark Nexus Manta is now called Astral Dark Nexus Manta and vice versa to reflect their appearance. Cool. Won't affect the meta in any way. Hanamura. Objective missile damage is increased from 1800 to 1900. Laner version of the Samurai Camp's health is being reduced. Laner version of health scaling is being reduced. So the real objective of Hanamura was this camp, and now they're nerfing this camp and they are buffing the objective. So the objective is going to be more valuable, but in the meta, this is not going to change too much. This is an objective that requires a ton of commitment. It's one of the longest objectives in the game as far as how much you need to commit into winning that objective. And during that entire time, there are a lot of things to get. So this is still going to require a ton of communication on this map, and because they did buff this, I think that there's a chance that we might be seeing a little bit more global heroes, where they might just sit on the objective and push while your team is like fighting over camps, and they can use their global to join. So that's the only thing that I'll see shifting in the meta is I think this is going to increase the value of global heroes, particularly ones that can solo camps like Illidan. Because then they could be on the camp or they could be on the objective and use their global to reach either or. But things like ETC would be decent to sit on the objective and then use global to join team fights. Now for the reworks. Now, what I'm going to point out is the basic idea of these, but I'm going to be giving an actual rundown of these in separate videos just to keep this video short, because the rework videos tend to be about 20 minutes. So Cassia, the idea that they're doing is they're going to reduce her health, increase her attack range to make her a little bit closer to the other auto attackers out there. They're going to reduce some of the damage, increase the cooldown, but then they're going to automatically give like the 2 charges. So you're going to get a lot of the features that you had in the talent tree in her actual kit, and then they're just going to make her more reliable. She attacks fewer times, but at the same time, she's just going to be, again, more reliable, more consistent. You don't need to run her with a bunch of blinds to make her work. But we'll talk about that blind mechanic in her actual rework. So just imagine that way. Their goal is to make her a little bit more reliable, and have a wider range of play. With that being said, let's get into Tracer. Tracer's range is being reduced from 5.5 down to 5, making her a little bit squishier. Not squishier, but riskier. Her damage is also being reduced, but her pulse bomb charge is going to be increased by a significant amount. Now, while I say that it's a significant amount, remember that increasing the charge rate and reducing the damage is also going to effectively, because reducing her damage is going to reduce her charge rate, but this is a higher increase than it is a decrease, so it is still a significant amount. Her health is being increased, and this is going to be great to compensate for the range reduction, but in order to reduce this range, it's like, what are they really doing? So, melee is going to increase the pulse bomb charge rate as well. Recall is reduced as far as the cooldown because you're riskier. This is a pretty decent change. The amount of time on a recall is reduced, so that's going to take a lot of practice for the Tracer mains out there, as well as the people that have been playing around Tracer. Pulse Bomb, the damage is being reduced, but it's going to be casted a lot more. Reload, additional functionality, you gain lifesteal on your basic attack. So this is huge because what they're doing is they're making it to where she's tankier, she can stay in fights longer without having a Tassadar, without having Malfurion, without having an Abathur trying to give her that regen and survivability. She's just getting a flat health increase, and she's gaining passive regen on her basic attacks. Now, 15% is not amazing, but it's also nothing to scoff at either. If you've ever looked at Sylvanas' regen on her damage, it's 30%, and that 30% on even a single target can make it to where you feel unkillable, but on a target that's super mobile and can dodge just about every skill shot is going to be a very sticky target. And that's the general idea. We'll get further into her rework when we get into that specific video, and we'll talk about that as well as some recommended builds for both Cassia and Tracer. Expect both of those videos out within the next 2 days or so. As far as the rest of the reworks that we have, or the rest of the balance, we have a huge balance patch today. And this is something that we're going to really break down because a lot of this, I love these balance patches. These make huge swings in the meta, and it's great to like pull in new builds to see what's going on. I love that we're seeing so much from the range DPS area, especially from a lot of heroes that we don't see a lot, like Orphea and Probius, as well as Chromie. So I'm really excited to see how this affects it. I always like seeing healer changes. So let's get into it. Artanis' health is being increased. His health regen is being increased to compensate for the health regen, or the health increase. Shield overload trait, the shield amount's been increased. This is a huge buff to his tankiness. The removing seasoned marksman, which was a talent that just wasn't really picked that much. It was usually amateur opponent, the ability to wipe out cams very quickly and race really well. With that being said though, they're adding reactive parry is going to have a new functionality, meaning that it's no longer going to do what it did before. Now damaging enemies with the first slash of Twin Blades grants 75 physical armor against the next hero basic attack. If the target is an enemy hero, then the second slash grants an additional stack. So if you hit anything, you get 1 stack. If you hit a hero, you get 2 stacks. You get a new talent, Protector of Ire, passive. It's a quest. They love quests. Basic attacks against enemy heroes increase your attack damage by 0.1. Takedowns grant 1%. This is just never ending. And here's the thing, is Artanis is one of those heroes where if you watch the video, the Ultimate URL Guide, Liam, the #1 GM in North America, is a solo lane main, and he said that Artanis is one of those bullies that just kind of beats everyone because the way that his shield works, it's really hard to get rid of it. Unless you're playing someone that can like naturally poke him down while his shield's off, he kind of bullies most melee heroes. And this is something that if you can bully someone on like Dragonshire or on Braxis, you're putting everyone on a timer. Because every auto attack, which is going to happen relatively often on like Braxis, where you're just constantly fighting someone, if Artanis is picked against a melee hero, this talent could be very, very powerful because it could stack up really, really fast. Warp Sickness is removed, and they're adding Chrono Surge. Attack speed bonus reduced, or they're not adding it, but it was already in there. Attack speed bonus is being reduced from 75 to 40. Additional functionality, now it slows. So they just put Warp Sickness onto Chrono Surge. Overall, I mean, these are some pretty good buffs. I actually kind of liked Warp Sickness. I just felt like it was outclassed by other stuff on that tier. Now it's in something that it's like, okay, I could see it. And this is actually a pretty good combo again for fighting in that 1v1, right? You're going to slow them, bump up your attack speed, and you're just going to keep hitting them repeatedly, stacking this up rather quickly. So I do expect him to be a little bit more of a bully. Don't focus so heavily on getting those god swaps anymore. Instead, you're going to focus on just gaining a huge amount of damage in the early game, grabbing the extra damage things for the late game fights, and then you're just gonna join your team and just blow people up. So it's I'm really excited to see how this affects them. Naturally, on most maps, this is still not going to be the pick, but on maps like Braxis and Dragonshire, I think this is going to be a pretty good option. Deathwing, his health is being reduced again. His health regen is being reduced. His cataclysm periodic damage is being reduced again. And remember how the scaling works with this, because the further you reduce this, it scales in 3 or 4 different ways because of his talents and level scaling. So this is pretty rough. Heatwave, this is what they really needed to nerf, and it's unfortunate because it's one of my favorite talents, but this is the true thing that they needed to nerf. And then there's one other talent that I would recommend them nerf, but none of these are them. And then they are buffing the Skyfall healing, but it no longer reduces your landing cooldown when hitting heroes. So all it is now is a healing tool and a poking tool. Firestorm, additional functionality, reduces the landing cooldowns by 2 seconds. So it's they're trying to get people away from using Skyfall because it just had too much utility and it was also the best talent on the tier. Now it's just there for utility, and there's a better talent on the tier for most fights if you don't need that utility. Dehaka, Darkswarm damage is being increased. Constriction on level 7 is being removed. Paralyzing Enzymes is being moved from level 16 to level 7, and now it's going to increase drag duration after it ends. It is going to slow them. So they're moving a very powerful talent down to this talent, and that means that it's going to be a very competitive talent versus lowering your drag cooldown. The reason why drag cooldown was so popular in the meta was not just the fact that you got more drags off, but because that increased your siege damage. Drag dealt a lot of damage, and you could auto-attack structures while you were waiting to use your global to get into a fight. You could auto-attack structures, use your drag to do extra damage to the structures, and continue auto-attacking structures. And increase your siege damage by a good almost 20 to 30%. And now you're going to have that compete with something else that's a very good talent. You get to drag people for further, and you get to slow them, so it's a higher chance of getting a kill. I would imagine for Dehakas that are valuing the global value more than the team fight, they're still going to be going the lower cooldown. And for the ones that are more expecting team fight after team fight, this drag duration is going to be very, very powerful. So this will likely change the meta for some Dehakas. And then level 16 new talent pack leader. While Dehaka is in a bush, and for 5 seconds after leaving, he gains 20 armor. Level 16, surprisingly for Dehaka, is not that competitive of a tier. So gaining something like this is interesting, but I also don't think he needs that sort of survivability because he's already someone that if you go the build that's high survivability, you're not dying. And if you go the other build, then the fight should be over when you isolate. And that's the downside of that. So overall, I don't think that this is going to make a huge meta swing. It probably will be the new pick for that survivability race car Dehaka build, but I don't think that's going to make any swings in the meta. I do think this might make a slight swing in the meta for competitive, unless they're going to still value that push potential over everything else. So overall, not too much there. Imperius, Pathetic Mortals. Additional functionality on the Q reduces the movement speed of the enemies hit by Celestial Charge by 25%. It's just pretty much buffing underutilized talents. I don't think it's going to make a major swing. He has very good talents on level 13. Talents that I personally think are going to be better. And you need to remember that if you're comboing your Q correctly, they're already going to be slowed from your W by the time they land. So it doesn't really matter because the way that it works is you're going to... The only thing that I really like about this is a 4-second slow. So, but that's competing with either a ridiculous amount of healing in burst or a increased amount of healing over the course of a fight. So it's like, do you want more survivability or do you want a higher chance of killing your target? But the slow that you already apply from your W should be long enough to kill your target. So I don't think this is going to make a major swing in the meta, but I could be wrong on that. Ragnaros, Sulphurous Smash. The cooldown is being made a 60-second cooldown. Mana cost is being reduced, and damage to enemies hit by its outer area is being increased by a lot. It was already one of the best follow-up ults, and it's a really good ult. Seeing it have that low of a cooldown is great. It's a difficult one to fire off to set up a fight, but it is an amazing ult to follow up a fight. It also has something that you can 100-0 just about anyone in the game when you're around level 20, and I mean even as early as level 10, if you use your trait and you stun someone with a Q, it guarantees your ult's gonna land, and then you can use your E and your W, and you kill just about anyone. It's a really powerful tool. Now, with a 60-second cooldown, that's the number where I tell people, hey, you're safe to just throw your ult out. If you have a 60-second cooldown, you're safe to throw it out to secure just about any kill, and this makes it kind of interesting. Like, I wasn't a big fan of, like, Rag in the 4-man, but to have that powerful of a follow-up on such a short cooldown could really affect, like, small blow-up comps, where, like, any type of tank that can force a fight followed up by Ragnaros just dropping a giant hammer. Yes, it's late because it's level 10, but it could actually potentially shift the meta a little bit. Lava Wave is awesome, but at the same time, Lava Wave can be a little bit of a crutch for some teams because they use it as, let's cover all of this extra soak, when in reality, it's surprisingly good for pushes, Because if you're pushing with it and you lava wave, everyone has to make a choice on the enemy team. Do we sit in the lava wave and try to fight them to defend whatever we're trying to defend, or do we walk away and let them just take the fort for free? And so lava wave has been kind of, to me, the opposite of Sylvanas trait, where Sylvanas trait turns off structures, Lava Wave turns off heroes. Both of them are invaluable during pushes. So Lava Wave's still very good, but Sulfurious Smash could, with this cooldown reduction, could allow him to be used a little bit more on maps that Lava Wave is less valued on, like on BOE, for example, where you can, if they get stunned by even one thing on defense, you just follow up with a Sulfurious Smash and immediately kill someone. So, I don't know. I think 60-second cooldown's a really good spot for that ult to keep it competitive. Zul has been dominant in the meta, permaban in the highest ranks, permaban in competitive, and what we see here, basic attack damage being reduced, Spectral Scythe damage is being reduced, Raised Skeleton damage the Skeletal Warriors do while they die is being reduced, Jailers, the movement attack speed bonuses have been reduced, Echoes of Death, the damage from the additional scythes have been reduced, and Decrepify, the slow amount is being reduced. This nerfs Q build pretty hard, W build's still there, and Q build at this point is just going to shift over to doing the reduced damage. I think this is a good spot. Unfortunately, I think that he's probably going to still see some extra nerfs after this. Healers. Anduin. Anduin's been in an odd spot. He's a jack of all trades, right? Jack of all trades. So he gets outclassed in like 5 different ways, because it's like, if you want cleanse, there's better cleanses. Leap of Faith is great, but if you're picking him for Leap of Faith and you're just losing all this other value by picking him, you're going to really struggle. His healing, he can kind of keep up with people, but it gets really, really difficult because his healing just generally is lower than others. Level 4, Holy Reach. This was an underutilized talent. New functionality, increased the root duration of Chastise from 1.25 to 1.5. After hitting an enemy hero with Chastise, your next basic attack deals 75% more damage and heals ally heroes near him for 100. So now this is competing with his auto attack talent, where the W would do auto attacks. I actually like this. This is finally... I've recommended a lot of changes to this talent, and this was not one of them, but I like this change enough that I would probably start running this talent. This is a decent increase in root, and this is a decent reward for landing a root. So, and remember that this 100 is 100 that is scaling. So this means that this will increase as you level, and this is not bad. You can trigger Renew on your own, and it'll make it towards a little less safe to trigger Renew on your own, but at the same time, this is going to make your follow-up so much more impactful. This is definitely a meta swing talent, in my opinion. Speed of the Pious. This is a talent I already thought was really good. Additional functionality. Each hero hit by Divine Star on its return to Anduin reduces its cooldown by 1 second. Okay, well, this is another meta swing talent. So I actually was just coaching someone, and I said... W build, you can take any individual one of the W talents, because even if your build is different, because there's no talents that reduce the cooldown of your W. So if they ever added a talent that increased the value or decreased the cooldown of your W, it means that you could go a full W build and it's way more valuable than taking any individual W talent. So this is another kind of meta swing where you could take all the W talents again, and suddenly you can now lower the cooldown by up to 5 seconds off of a W, which is an insanely big cooldown reduction. This turns your level 13 from a decent talent tier to a huge power spike. But let's continue. Enchanted Boots, additional functionality. Allies pulled by this are healed by 280 over 4 seconds. Remember, this is 280 at level 1. So by level 13, that should be a lot higher. For 4 seconds. This is also a really big increase of healing and a great way to save people and keep them still in the fight. Push Forward, now labeled as Chastise Talent E, so it's going to show up as Chastise. Additional functionality, while gaining 20% bonus movement speed, Chastise cooldown recharges faster. Ooh, 13 is a competitive tier now, a really competitive tier, because this talent was picked in the competitive scene because it was just flat movement speed increase that was unconditional, and then you would only lose that movement speed after a fight's over and you'd gain it back before the next fight. Speed of the Pious was my favorite because you would use your W and want to move around quickly to heal everyone, and it gave you your own playmaking potential. And then Push Forward, I just never really liked because by the time you ramped up that movement speed, the fight was over. But now, if you land a Chastise, get a couple hits, do a little bit of extra damage with your W, hitting a couple things, you now have a lower cooldown of Chastise. But remember how this is worded. 25% faster, which means that it's only going to cut the cooldown of Chastise by 1/8. Which means that's not very much. That's going to make the cooldown 7/8 of what it was before. It's not that big of a deal. So ultimately, in my opinion, this talent's still out. You don't gain that movement speed until after the fight should be over, or until the majority of that fight's done. Enchanted Boots, I think, is really good, but oh man, this is going to increase your healing by a significant amount. It's also going to make it harder for you not to take Apex on this tier, but this is such a good talent. So I think this is going to have some meta swings for sure. No longer places Flash Heal on a 10-second cooldown. I don't think this is going to be a level 20 pick even still, because you don't want to be sitting still for a long period of time just to get a big heal, and you want to have that ability to pull 2 different people or upgrade your other ult if you want it. Overall, I think this is going to buff W build significantly, so that's going to be an easier build, but in the competitive scene, I think Holy Reach and I think Enchant Boots is going to see a buff. So keep that in mind, guys. W build is going to see a lot more healing and a lot more value, but if you have decent setup for your team, your follow-up on Anduin now is going to be insanely strong. So yeah, meta swings for sure. If you have some coordination and you can stun first, E is going to be insanely good at level 4. More damage, big heals, and longer route. Very, very good follow-up. On to the next one. Brightwing. Polymorph slow amounts being increased. It's going to make it easier to land your Q as well. Pixie Dust. Spell armor amount is being increased. It's going to make you easier against burst. Phase shift cooldown is being reduced, and healing is being increased. It pretty much just buffs all across the board for Brightwing. Cooldown reduction is being reduced. This is to compensate for the fact that they're just doing a flat reduction on that. And this is also going to buff Bribe build, seeing as they're just buffing this flatline and they're nerfing this talent, so Bribe build's going to be a little bit stronger. Magic Spit cooldown reduction is being increased, and that would lower the cooldown of your trait, and then they're buffing the trait talent. So trait build is like they're buffing it, but it still isn't going to be that good. Just so no meta swings other than the fact that Bribe Wing is going to be a little bit more popular. That's about it. Deckard Cain, health is being increased, health regen is being increased. Scroll of Identify, quest requirements is being reduced. Ruby, cooldown reduced from 20 to 10 seconds. Okay, guys, it's hitting a point where I didn't want to recommend Ruby, but we're getting closer and closer to me recommending Ruby, just saying. Lornado cooldown being reduced. So here's the thing that kind of throws me about Deckard. Deckard was a first pick material in the competitive scene. Deckard was one of the strongest supports in the game. If you didn't get Tyrande, you pretty much got Deckard, and that was HGC. Deckard has been buffed several times since the pro scene has left. He is still the best healer to be in the competitive scene, and he is getting better and better and better. And if you guys are in the competitive scene, if you can learn Deckard really, really well, you will dominate. Do I recommend Ruby? I think if you are setting up for your team, you should be using Sapphire, and if you're following up for your team, you should be using Emerald. So Ruby doesn't really see a time where you should be getting a lot of play, but with such a low cooldown, if you're not expecting a fight, throwing a quick Ruby around just so you have a bunch of healing pots around could be very beneficial against poke-heavy teams. And a 10-second cooldown, guys, like, I just, that's really good. I still think in the competitive scene you go with the shield, because the shield is going to allow you to survive burst. But outside of the competitive scene, Ruby is too much healing to pass up, and I'm finally at that. I think I'm finally on board with Ruby. And then this extra health. I mean, he's already a healer that you can't dive. So now you have a healer that you can't dive. You have a healer that has insane CC. You now have a healer that has great in-between fight healing. You have a healer that's, I mean, Lornado is just for fun. I still go the other one, but a 30-second cooldown is like, I mean, if you're good at Lornado, you're setting up a fight all the time. On maps like Tomb of the Spider Queen, the hallways are so small that you can almost always guarantee that you're getting like a reverse gust. Guys, why is the competitive scene not playing Deckard? Blows my mind. He literally was like first pick, first ban. Not first ban, but he was banned a lot and picked a lot in HGC, and he's only been buffed since then. Blows my mind. Melee Assassins, Alarak, sustaining power has been removed. So what this talent did and why it was bad is... Let me pull out a notepad because this is kind of the most annoying part about this. So sustaining power increased your healing of your E by 40%. But the way spell power works in Heroes of the Storm is additive and not multiplicative, which means that your sadism would increase your damage by, let's say you were at 100% sadism, right? Then this would actually only increase your healing by 140% rather than by 40% multiplicative. Which means that your healing, the effective value of your healing was actually closer to 20%, and if you were at level 1, it was 22%. And the better you do on Alarak, the worse this talent gets. And so that's the reason why this was just a terribly designed talent. They're changing it. After hitting an enemy hero with Discord, Alarak gains 40% attack speed, and his basic attacks heal him for 50% of the damage dealt for 4 seconds. Now, I've been accused before of recommending an Alarak auto attack build. I've only ever pushed the W build and E build. Before the E build was nerfed, I pushed the E build. And then once the E build was nerfed and the W build was buffed, I pushed the W build. Seeing as he can gain 40% attack speed and then there's another attack damage boost at level 16, it's a possibility. But honestly, because of how he works and his sadism, if you die, you're screwed. I don't want to sit in a fight for a long period of time. So I don't recommend auto attack build with Alarak purely because if you're staying in a fight for a long time, you're giving the opposing team more opportunities to kill you. So I'm not a big fan of that. Hindered motion, slow amount increase from 25 to 30%. I think this talent's underrated, but it's in the competitive scene, being able to pull people further distances and closer is much more impactful. But hindered, I would say outside of the competitive scene, enemies are more likely to make bigger mistakes. And if they make a bigger mistake, then you can punish that bigger mistake harder, and you don't need to give up sadism for it. So I'm going to say in solo queue, this talent is actually closing in on being a little bit better than the other one. Because it just gives your team more opportunities to follow up on what you're pulling, and the enemies are more likely to make those mistakes. In the competitive scene, none of this is going to change anything for Alarak. Ranged Assassins, Chromie, Dragon's Breath is getting a buff, Bronze Talons is getting a buff, Mobius Loop is getting a buff, Slowing Sands is getting a buff, and Quantum Overdrive is getting a buff. Blessing of the Bronze, this is what Blessing of the Bronze needed. 30-second cooldown that you can get those cooldown reductions. Cooldown reduction when hitting enemies with heroes with Sandblast reduced from 8 seconds to 1 second. So that's the downside. It's more consistently going to be a lower cooldown, but you won't be able to shave off the cooldown as much as you were in the past. But it more consistently will be a lower cooldown. So will this break through Pierce? Probably not. But yeah, this is a pretty good buff to Chromie. Chromie in the competitive scene still has the downside of the damage doesn't necessarily go where you want it to go. Because people are always moving around so much that where you're aiming it, you might not hit the person you're looking for, but you're going to hit someone else. And tanks can play and block a lot of your damage, so she still has those downsides. But these are incredible buffs for if you play her in Storm League. Jaina, Snowstorm, damage bonus increase from 30 to 70 to 50 to 100. This talent keeps getting buffed, and eventually it's going to hit the point where you can't ignore it. It's closing in on that, honestly. The downside is that most people only ever get hit by the first wave of W, and if they're going to get hit by more than that at level 16, they should die, like, way sooner. If someone's standing still for enough to get hit by 3 blizzards in the late game, they're just going to die. Which is why this talent usually isn't picked up. Reducing armor means that your team's going to kill them faster, and rooting them means that they're going to stay still longer, so your team's going to kill them faster. But Snowstorm's very, very difficult. Now, the level 13 talent with this does make this more powerful, but if you're not taking Icy Veins, you're in trouble because that's like not taking a second ultimate. Imagine heroes that have the potential to take 2 ultimates. Jane is one of those, and so unless they nerf Icy Veins, I don't see people taking this talent or the other one. I don't see any major meta swings, but this does buff an easier build on Jaina. Li Ming, Disintegrates cooldown is being reduced, Wave of Force's cooldown is being increased. They're just swapping these a little bit. Honestly, Wave of Force is better for resets. This is still going to be the talent picked for reset builds, And Disintegrate, and honestly, this is going to be a big nerf to Repulsion. Not a big nerf, but it's going to be a decent nerf to Repulsion, because if you don't lead to a reset, then you can't do it as often. So I think this is a pretty good change. It makes the easier build of Li Ming do a little bit more damage, and it makes the more difficult builds slightly nerfed. So, but at the same time, people that are good with it, it's not going to feel like a nerf. Won't make a major meta swing in the competitive scene, but honestly, this is going to make Orb build with Disintegrate be a little bit scarier if you play in the lower ranks. Orphea. Shadow Walt's cooldown's being reduced, mana cost is being reduced, Chomps damage is being increased, Dreads, additional functionality, enemies hit by Dreads wave are slowed. This was already a thing, and they removed it, and it felt horrible, and now they're growing Nightmare. New functionality increases Dread's Eruption damage by 40%. Quest hit 3 enemy heroes with a single cast of Dread's Eruption. Reward permanently increase Dread's Eruption damage by an additional 25%. Increase the slow amount by 15%. That's actually huge. E-build's back on the menu, guys. Chaotic Assault bonus damage is being increased. Abyssal Symbiosis additional functionality hitting them with Chomp grants Orphea and 180 shield. Dude, Orphea is back in. One of the downsides about Orphea was that if you missed your Q, you just felt like you were kind of a dead hero for a while. With the lower cooldown, that's less punishing. And they're also rebuffing E-build quite a bit. And you're in a really, really good spot. E-build and Q-build got significant buffs in this patch. I would say Orphea is closing back she's getting a lot closer to being back into the meta. I would say if you play her in Storm League, these are significant buffs and nothing to scoff at. If you're playing her in competitive, however, she may be a replacement for some of these burst mages, because if someone's going to CC them long enough to where you can land an E, if you had any of these quests done, you're in a really good spot. And if they CC them long enough to land a Q, then you're likely able to get a Q, a W, or a Q, and a W. And that means that she's going to be a decent replacement for burst mages in the competitive scene. But I think it might take a while for people to realize that she's at that point. Probius, he's still in this game? No, I'm just kidding. Warp Resonance, honestly, because I can't make too much comments on this. I'm just going to read these because I really don't know where he stands in the meta, and I don't know where this is going to affect. The requirements are being reduced for Warp Resonance, which it was a difficult quest to get. Photon Barrier, Spell Armor, bonus is being increased. Damage is being increased on your Q. For Particle Accelerator, Null Gate's cooldown is being reduced, and Gatekeeper no longer has a restriction allowing 1 Null Gate at a time, so you could just keep bringing Null Gates out. Which they're kind of a gimmicky way to take out like structures. At level 20, you could just drop down a Null Gate, and then it would just stay there forever, slowly melting down a keep that people aren't paying attention to. And so that's something that you could still do, but now you can do it on like multiple keeps. Honestly, for the one tricks out there, these are going to be some pretty cool changes. For everyone else, this isn't going to change too much. Tassadar, he's getting a health increase. He's getting a health reduction, or health regeneration increase. Shock Ray's slow amount is being increased. Whoa, guys. I really think that this was a hero that was actually really rather strong, that people just weren't that good at. These buffs seem kind of insane. Bonus damage per stack is increased. This kind of needed to happen, because even though this is a great quest, I was having trouble completing it in brawls. I was closing out games before I could complete it in brawls. It's wild. These buffs are actually wild. This talent wasn't picked very much, so it's a good buff, but like, guys, I actually have no idea why they're going this many buffs. I figured Tassadar was really strong. People just need to get good at him. In fact, one of the guys that I've been talking to, he just moved up from like low silver to gold playing new Tassadar, and he's only been playing him for a little bit. Like, I always thought that he was strong. People just weren't that good with him yet, but maybe I was wrong. So hey, I don't know. He's better now. Bug fixes. Lockdowns could appear able to be selected in game, causing confusion. Cho'Gall, disconnected players, replacement AI was no longer becoming passive. Then we've got Deathwing, disconnected AIs, fixed issues. Guys, I'm not seeing the change or the issues for Imperius being fixed. Hopefully they got fixed, but I'm not seeing those. So keep that in mind, that if those are not fixed, make sure to throw a ban at Imperius, because if you're if you're going against one and they're abusing that bug, it's not going to feel good, because right as they hit level 10, they're going to be taking forts pretty much instantly. I'm not going to explain how to do it or anything, because I don't want anyone to be abusing bugs, but at the same time, just ban Imperius. Now, if this did get hotfixed and this just wasn't mentioned, then feel free to throw it down in the comments below. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching. This was a long one, but it was a beefy patch. I will be doing, you see why I skipped the Tracer and the Cassia for now, is because I need to go back and do those later. But thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to stay tuned on my channel. I will be having those videos come out over the next 2 days, explaining everything that there is to know about the new Tracer and the new Cassia, as well as I will give some recommended builds for playing with those heroes. So keep that in mind. We will all see you soon, and thanks again for lasting through a 40-minute video.